Well, I have to tell you that I have recently been accused of being negligent in my duties, that I haven't been fulfilling my work assignment effectively, and that I need to do better. And so tonight I'm going to attempt to make correction and do better. Specifically, what I've been criticized about, I'm actually exaggerating there. Specifically, what I've been asked to teach on is on the subject of modesty. And the suggestion was that this is an overdue lesson and that I had been sort of neglecting to teach on something that we typically try to cover in the spring or early summer months of the year. Here we are almost to the 4th of July, and I haven't touched on this subject. And so, again, I hope to remedy that tonight. We want to have a lesson on modesty. We talk about this about once a year typically. Some people say, oh, you all have a hang up about this. You talk about it all the time. We actually don't talk about it much. One time a fellow said, I think maybe we put too much emphasis on the subject of modesty. And so I said, well, think about it this way. In a typical year, there are about 100 sermons to be preached in a typical year. There's 52 weeks, but say there's 50 weeks and 2 sermons every week. And so that would work out easily to 100 sermons a year. If we spend one of those times talking about modesty, then that means that we have spent just 1% of our time talking about what is obviously a huge problem. The problem of immodesty in our society and the effect of that on us as the people of God is pretty incredible. I mean, you don't have to go out in public very much at all to begin to see all kinds of immodest dress, just really outrageous forms of immodesty. If you go to the Walmart store, you almost have to wear blinders because you're certain to see things that you really don't need to be seeing in regards to the immodesty of some of the people who will be present there in public. So it's a huge problem, and we do try to cover it early in the summer every year, and so we're a little late this year, but let's talk about modesty tonight. We're going to entitle our lessons, Factors to Consider When Making Your Clothing Choices. Now, I think the very fact that you all are here on a Sunday night shows that you are people who are devoted to the Lord and you want to do His will in your life. That's great. That's commendable. That being the case, this to you and I should be a very important subject. We want to be right in regards to the clothing that we wear, and we believe that there are some biblical principles to set forth to help us in making good choices. Before we get further to that, we just simply thank you for being here on Sunday night to join in this period of worship and Bible study. We're encouraged by your presence today. Thanks for coming. And for any who may be visiting with us, thanks for being here as well. We're glad that you're here. Clothing choices. You know, we make these choices every day, literally. Every day you make some choice about the clothes you're going to wear on a given day. And so when you're making choices about clothes, let me suggest to you there could be some wrong reasons for choosing that would lead us to make bad choices. Wrong reasons lead to bad choices. You know, that's true about a lot of things. If you were thinking about buying a used car and you went out to see this used car and you were just so impressed because this car had a really neat sound system, you know. It's not just a radio, it's a sound system. This has got a cool sound system in this car. And it has looks like a fairly recent paint job. The paint's pretty shiny on this car. And perhaps even sort of nice custom wheels. And man, that's great. I'm going to buy that car. And you don't stop to check out that the engine is completely shot and the transmission won't work. So you got distracted by some things that didn't matter too much, and you made your decision. You had wrong reasons. You made a bad decision, and you bought that, unfortunately, inadequate used car. Wrong reasons lead to bad choices. There's some wrong reasons why we might choose the clothes that we wear. One of the reasons might be that it is the popular thing. The popular trend in clothing is do this, wear this, dress this way. Sort of the idea that we're suggesting here is that we might make a choice based upon this, what everybody else is doing. But I think all of us know, and we've been taught, I remember being taught as a kid, that that is bad reasoning. To just, and I know, and I've told you all before, my dad, I learned, I was a slow learner, but I learned after a while to quit saying that. When I would say to my dad, everybody's doing it, he'd say, well, that's probably a good reason for you not to do it. If everybody's doing it, it probably indicates it's a bad thing. And he was right about that, of course. But unfortunately, we are influenced by societal trends. And in regards to clothing, we're influenced by what is popular, but we got to be careful. Worldly trends are headed in a wrong direction. And I think that's evidenced in the fact that when today, when we try to teach godly principles of clothing and dress and modesty, the very same things that we were teaching 30 or 40 years ago, now, today, even in some churches, we're considered to be odd or fanatical when we teach the principles that were agreed upon by all 30 or 40 years ago. So that shows you how the trends, the societal trends, can negatively impact our thinking. What's popular in clothing? That's not necessarily a good basis on making our choices. You remember that Moses said to the children of Israel very famously in Exodus 23 verse 2, "Thou shalt not follow a multitude to do evil." There's always been a tendency. This statement implies that there's always been a tendency to follow the world, to follow popular trends. Moses had to warn the Israelites about that. We need to be warned about that. We just cannot blindly follow the popular trends. It will cause us to make bad decisions in lots of ways, but in specific, it will cause us to make bad decisions about the clothes that we wear. In the reading that Rick read earlier for us from Matthew 7, verses 13 and 14, you know very well that this describes what's going to happen to the majority, to the popular majority. What will happen? Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leadeth to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat, because strait is the gate, and narrow is the way which leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. This clearly tells us that we should be very cautious about following the popular majority opinion of things, and in particular, in regards to dress, that's a good, fair warning. And then another familiar verse, we're talking about choices. You remember how Joshua challenged the children of Israel in Joshua 24, verse 15. "If it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Notice Joshua was talking about choices. We have to make choices. We need the courage of Joshua to say, you choose, but I'll tell you what we're going to choose. I'm going to tell you for me and my house what we're going to do. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So again, a wrong reason leading to bad choices about clothes would be what's popular. Let me suggest to you another bad choice kind of way to think is what's comfortable or what's convenient. So we're talking about clothes and the choices that you might make about the clothes you wear. And so, well, I just want to be comfortable, someone says. And so the argument for comfort then is used to justify clothing that's not modest. Now, I got to tell you, I'm going to argue this a different way, but I'm going to tell you right up front, I'm not sure I buy that argument that immodest clothes are more comfortable than modest clothes. I just don't really buy that argument. And I think you would agree with me. How often have you seen a man or a woman struggling with immodest clothes, you know, maybe trying to tug it down to keep a short skirt pulled down when they're sitting, or maybe pulling up a top that's too short, trying to keep from exposing parts of their body. They look like they're in a constant battle with their clothes, trying to stay covered. Well, right up front, I'm going to tell you, I'm not particularly buying that argument that immodest clothes are more comfortable to wear. But if I was to grant that, argument, I just have this question. What does that say about making sacrifice making a sacrifice in order to obey God? Maybe, again, if you grant that immodest clothes are more comfortable, would you sacrifice that comfort in order to obey God? We ought to be willing to sacrifice whatever we have to sacrifice in order to please God. Jesus said in Luke chapter 9, verse 23, if any man will come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. Are we willing to do any self-denial here? And maybe deny our desires, our own preferences when it comes to the clothes we wear. Another wrong reason that leads to bad choices is this expressed attitude: I actually don't care. I don't care what anybody else thinks. I don't care what you think about what I wear. It's my business. Just keep your nose out of my business. I've been told that before in regards to a number of things, but I've been told that specifically in regards to clothes that we wear. It's my business, and I don't care what you think. I will wear what I want. I don't care what you think. I'll tell you, that underlying attitude that's possessed by some people, sadly possessed by some people, that attitude is wrong. And I would even argue that that's a sinful attitude to express that I don't care what my brethren in particular care about what I'm doing. If I don't care, then I got a heart problem for sure. Remember Hebrews 10, 23 and 24. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for he is faithful that promised. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works. I've got to be thinking about you. You've got to be thinking about me. And if what I'm doing in any regard is a discouragement to you, then I need to rethink that. Right? And that principle would be, in particular or specific application, that principle would apply to the clothing choices. If the clothes I'm choosing to wear serves as a distraction or a discouragement to my brethren, then I need to rethink that. Because I'm not thinking right when I say I don't care what others think. It's my own business. And then let me suggest another bad way of thinking in regards to these clothing choices is the idea of compromise. I've heard people say we've got to be willing to bend a little on some things. We've got to compromise sometimes. Maybe especially with our kids and the things that we're asking our kids to do. We've got to compromise a little to make it a little easier for them. Be a little more human, you know. Maybe we don't want our kids to be different from others. I got to tell you, that spirit of compromise is very dangerous, and it just leads to more problems. Compromise is bad. In 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 17, Paul said, wherefore come out from among them. Be ye separate, saith the Lord. Touch not the unclean thing, and I will receive you. God has always expected his people to stand out from the world, to be different, and to not compromise with worldly kinds of thinking and concepts. So we might expand this list, but I want to suggest you can make your clothes choices based upon a variety of bad reasons and thus make bad choices. And I hope you agree that is the case. Well, what are the right reasons then? What are the right reasons in regards to, now we're talking about one thing specifically, but some of what we're saying is applicable broadly. We're talking about clothes, choosing the right kind of clothes to wear. What are the right reasons that lead to godly choices? What we're saying here is we got to use our heads, we've got to think, and we've got to be committed to what is right. If we use our heads, if we're committed to doing what's right, my thinking is that good, godly decisions will follow. So what are some of these ways that we should think, right ways of thinking that lead to good choices? Well, first of all, I want to talk about what I'm going to identify as biblical absolutes in regards to our clothes. Now, this right here, at this very point, there are some people who want to disagree that there are any absolutes when it comes to our clothing. A lot of people, a lot of our own brethren would suggest to you that this is sort of a big gray area and there's no hard absolutes. And very frequently you hear people say, I don't believe that you can draw any lines when it comes to modesty. You just can't draw a line. I'm going to tell you right up front, I deny that. I deny the idea that there are no absolutes, and I deny the statement that you can't draw any particular lines when it comes to the clothes that we wear. Now let me show you why I'm saying that. First of all, there's a biblical absolute that is identified as nakedness. Now, we have to understand that the term nakedness, as it's used biblically, does not necessarily mean total nudity. You know, I think in our modern usage of terminology, if I told you that somebody was naked, or if I said this person was exposing their nakedness, I think most people today, oh, that guy didn't have any clothes on at all. He was totally naked or total nudity. That's not the way the term is used biblically. The term nakedness simply suggests not sufficient clothing, not adequate clothing to cover necessary body parts. So exposing your nakedness would not mean that you didn't have any clothes on at all, but it would mean that you're exposing parts of your body that you ought not to be showing. Let's see where we can establish that. A lot of us have been through this multiple times before, but I think it's always good to be reminded. Genesis chapter 3, go all the way back to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. You know the story, you know it well. Genesis chapter 3, beginning verse 1, now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field. And when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, it was pleasant to the eyes, a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them were both open, and they knew that they were naked, and they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. Now here, in this case, we understand contextually that naked does mean they didn't have a stitch of clothing on. They were naked. They became aware of their nakedness. And what they did is that they made themselves aprons. Concentrate on what they did to remedy the nakedness problem. They made for themselves aprons, it says. Now this word aprons, and you can do a word study on this in the original languages, but the word apron here suggests, notice that the aprons were made out of fig leaves. The aprons were a covering that just covered the midsection of the body. To be real blunt, it was just something to cover their private areas. They made themselves aprons. That's all it covered, was their midsection, their private parts. That's what they did when they sensed their nakedness. Well, notice as the story goes on, in verse 9, the Lord God called to Adam and said to him, where art thou? And he, Adam, said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid, because I was naked, and I hid myself. So when the Lord came looking for Adam, and Adam hid himself from God, the reason why he hid himself was he said, I was naked. But wait a minute. He had already, the aprons had already been made, and yet notice that Adam still felt naked. He felt inadequately covered. Here the word naked doesn't mean without any covering, because he had some coverings. He had part of his body covered, but he even himself felt like his covering wasn't adequate. He still felt naked even after he'd made the aprons, which covered, as we said, the midsection or private areas of his body and Eve's body. And so, you know how the story goes on, and they're cursed for the sin and so forth. But it says, as that whole episode winds down in verse 21, it says, unto Adam also to his wife did the Lord God make coats of skins and clothed them. And so the Lord made them coats, it says. Now the word coat comes from a Hebrew word here that suggests, according to authorities, it suggests a tunic-like garment covering at least from the neck to the knees or below. And so it seems very clear that not only did Adam feel like he was inadequately covered by the aprons. By the way, the aprons would have been equivalent to maybe swimming trunks for a man, or something like that. Adam didn't feel adequately covered when he had that much of himself covered by the fig leaves, the aprons. And you got to believe, and it's clearly implied, that God didn't feel like that was adequate covering either. And so he made for them coats of skins and clothed them. Notice, he clothed them. They weren't really clothed adequately before. The coats would have covered from the neck to the knees or below, a tunic-like garment. All right, so again, here early on in the Bible accounts, we read about the problem of nakedness and how it was addressed. First of all, inadequately addressed by Adam and Eve, and then fully addressed by God himself when he made them coats. You get a little idea about what's it take to cover nakedness. These coats, these tunic-like garments that would have covered from the neck to the knees or below, that's what God made to cover nakedness. So if we're going to have our nakedness covered, you'd think that that would be a sort of a significant description, wouldn't it, as to what it takes to do that. Again, are there any biblical absolutes? Yeah, we got to cover our nakedness. We get an indication here of what it would take to do so. Now there's another text that we've referred to in the past, and we will look at it again from Exodus 28, beginning verse 40. In Exodus 28, you recognize Exodus. God's given the law to Moses. In this particular section, the garments of the priests are being described. Now, we are not Old Testament priests. We are not advocating for wearing the priestly garments of the law of Moses time period. We're just looking at this text. I've had people question me about reference to this. We're just using this text to get a definition of terminology. What's it take to cover bodily nakedness? Well, in Exodus 28, beginning verse 40, for Aaron's sons thou shalt make coats, thou shalt make for them girdles, and bonnets shalt thou make for them for glory and for beauty, and thou shalt make them linen breeches to cover their nakedness. Oh, well, that's interesting. We're interested in what does it take to cover nakedness. Well, these breeches, we would say breeches, these breeches were made to cover nakedness. Well, what did they cover? Well, the next phrase, from the loins even unto the thighs they shall reach, and they shall be upon Aaron, upon his sons, when they come into the tabernacle of the congregation, or when they come near unto the altar to minister in the holy place, that they bear not iniquity and die. Now, I've used this terminology before. Do not imagine that these were some kind of shorts, right? But do not imagine that Aaron and his sons, as they went about their priestly duties, were out there working in Bermuda shorts. They weren't. This was their undergarments or their underwear. These breeches were under their priestly robes, because you can imagine there was some pretty heavy work involved in slaughtering and sacrificing animals at the tabernacle, later at the temple. These undergarments were for the specific purpose that if in the course of their work there might be an occasion where someone might get a glimpse under their robes. Their robes might get disordered in the course of the heavy work they were doing. Their robes would have covered a lot more. And so this wasn't even what was typically to be exposed. This was, though, specifically in case their garments might have got disordered, where somebody could see under their robes and see their nakedness. And so they wore these breeches from their loins, from their waist, and to the thighs, covering the thighs. From the waist and covering the thighs, they had these linen breeches to cover their nakedness. Again, we're only referencing this for the sake of seeing what is nakedness and what does it take to cover nakedness. You've got to cover to the knees in order to cover nakedness. Now, this is obviously specifically talking about the lower part of the body. You've got to cover to your knees to cover nakedness. Okay, now let's do a little exercise in application. All right, we had the account of Adam and Eve with their coats. We've got the information about the priest and their breeches. So I want to ask let's talk about the upper torso of the body to start with. Okay, let's talk about the upper torso of the body. Would it be enough to cover just up this high on the upper torso of the body? Now by the way, could we make this point right here? I don't see any distinguishing between the lines for men and women. You know, I don't know where that got started, where somebody imagined that men could expose their upper torso, but women could not expose their upper torso. I don't know where that idea ever generated. It didn't generate in the Bible. All right. So what we're talking about would be applicable to men and women alike. And so here's a man or a woman, and they've got just this much of their upper torso covered. Would that be adequate to cover nakedness? I think, not only would we all agree, oh no, that's not enough. Typically, people of the world would also agree, especially in regards to women, if they've just got themselves covered up this high and they're exposing the rest of their upper torso, they're not covered adequately, right? That's not going to get the job done. Well, let's raise the line a little bit. Let's raise the line up to here. Okay, let's raise the line up to here. Is that enough coverage? Remember, our purpose is to cover nakedness. And so here we've raised the line up, but still, I mean, especially in regards to women, part of the breast is still exposed here. Right? We got to say that's not enough either. That's got to go higher, right? What kind of coats did God make for Adam and Eve? He made them those tunic-like coverings that covered from the neck and down. We got to get that line up, right? Now again, what about the person? I don't believe you can draw any absolute lines. Really? You don't? You don't believe you can draw any absolute lines? Well, everybody draws a line somewhere, right? Where's the Bible line drawn? All right, so this would be applicable, and I think typically women are the ones who are more challenged in this part of the body than others. This would dictate that women ought not to be exposing parts of their upper torso, especially revealing parts of their breast. That's nakedness, right? That line, we got to get that line up to cover nakedness. That's all we're saying, cover nakedness. I was just recently talking to a member of a church in another state, and this good lady was telling me that her husband has had to ask not to be assigned to pass the Lord's Supper because the women in that congregation are wearing such low tops that the men who are passing the Lord's Supper elements are seeing things that they shouldn't be seeing. Right? So it is a problem, right? It is a problem. So in regards to the upper part of the body, and I got to say, and I'm glad to be able to say it, I think that all of us here are pretty much in good agreement about this, and that's a good thing. All right, let's talk about the lower part of the body. Let's talk about this line. You can't draw lines. Someone says, yeah, I think you can draw some lines, right? Because there's some biblical principles established, particularly the biblical principle of covering nakedness. So let's talk about the lower part of the body. Would this be enough if this guy or gal had on short shorts? And you see them in the world, right? You see short shorts in the world. I mean, they are as short as they could consider. I sometimes think that structurally a pair of pants couldn't be any shorter, because if they were cut any shorter on this gal, they would fall apart. You know, you've seen short shorts that short. Could you wear that? Oh no, we all agree. Absolutely you could not. And by the way, that wouldn't be covering any more than what the aprons of Adam and Eve covered, and it wasn't enough. That's not going to get the job done. Let's lower that line. Let's take it down a ways. Let's take it down to mid-thigh. If you took the line down to mid-thigh, would that be enough? to cover nakedness. Well, no, that would not be enough, because we understand, and we could do a little more thorough word study of that passage where the garments of the priests were described. But it's clear that the whole thigh of the leg there had to be covered in order to cover nakedness. Mid-thigh is not good enough. Now, we see a lot of people wearing shorts. I'm sad to say we see a lot of our own brethren wearing shorts that come to mid-thigh. That's not enough. That's still exposing nakedness. If parts of your thigh are being seen, then you're exposing nakedness. We got to get that line lower. That line has got to come to the knees or below to be covering nakedness, okay? So I think right in here, we have identified the parts of the body that has to be covered for this biblical absolute to be honored. The biblical absolute being, don't expose nakedness. And I think that we've been able to identify that this is the case. Now, let's say that somebody does have all that part covered. I just want to make one caveat here. You could have all that part of the body covered, but you could have that part of the body covered in such tight, revealing clothing, form-fitting, form-revealing kind of clothing, that would still be immodest. I do not want to suggest that just because you had it technically covered in spandex, that would necessarily be modest. You could have that area covered in tight, form-fitting and revealing kind of clothing that, again, is unfortunately popular in our world. That would not be modest. But in regards to our discussion tonight, this area of the body has to be covered to satisfy the biblical absolute, cover your nakedness. Now, before we pass from this, let me make an observation. And if you'll think with me about this, you have to agree that this is true. What about a woman who has such a loose top on that when she bends over, you see right in, nothing's covered? So when she's standing, her top or blouse may cover, but when she bends over, it doesn't anymore. That's a problem, because this standard has to be met in all body positions and physical contortions that we might have to engage in a given day. And even more so down here. If I've got a cover to my knees or below, that's not just when I'm standing up. You know what happens when you sit down, right? You women who have a short skirt on, especially a tight short skirt, and you sit down, maybe it comes to the knee when you're standing up. When you sit down, it's mid-thigh or shorter. You're exposing nakedness. Men, when you wear your shorts, and they may come to your knees when you're standing up, that's not the total test. When you sit down, when you bend, when you get into your car, and your shorts ride up to mid-thigh or higher, you're exposing your nakedness. That's a biblical absolute. That's a line that can be drawn, okay? And so we've got to understand that. We need to know in making our clothes choices that there are some biblical absolutes at play here. Cover your nakedness. But then let me add this. That is modesty and shamefacedness. We actually, as the people of God, we have a higher standard to observe than just cover your nakedness. We have a higher standard than that. Even that is not enough. We've got to practice the principles of modesty and shamefacedness. A real important text in this regard is 1 Timothy 2, beginning verse 9. In like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel. Okay, so he's talking about clothes, modest clothes. So in like manner also that women adorn themselves in modest apparel with shamefacedness and sobriety, not with braided hair, gold or pearls, or costly array, but which becometh women professing godliness with good works. This text actually says that you can overdress and draw attention to yourself too, right? Braided hair, gold, pearls, costly array. Basically, he's saying modesty is the principle of not drawing attention to yourself by what you wear. And it could be wearing too little, which is a huge problem. It could be wearing too much, too ostentatious in your apparel. I think that's clearly in this passage as well. But here's the key word to think about. When it comes to making these choices, we need to practice shamefacedness. Now that's not a word. I'm absolutely certain that you haven't used the word shamefacedness in an average daily conversation, probably in your whole lifetime. What is shamefacedness? Well, shamefaced, this is a definition by R.C. Trench in his book, Synonyms of the New Testament. He says, shamefacedness is an innate sense of honor which shrinks from overpassing the limits of womanly reserve and modesty, as well as from the dishonor. And so this is shying away from any possibility that you could be immodest. Shamefacedness is not just covering your nakedness. This is a sense of shame. Vine says it is literally a sense of shame, modesty which is fast or rooted in the character, he says. And so shamefacedness is not, I'm going to see how bold and brash I can be. I'm going to see how close I can get to being immodest without crossing the line. No, this is a person who had another source referenced it as respectful timidity. You're not trying to be bold, you're trying to be timid in this regard. You not want to see how much you can get away with. You're trying to be very reserved. And that's the idea of shamefacedness. Notice, he says, he speaks of women professing godliness. He speaks of being noticed because of good works. Good works should be what attracts people's attention to you, not the kind of clothes that you wear. But the fact that Paul added by inspiration this expression, I think denotes the fact that how you dress and the choices you make about dress actually reveal something about your inner person, about your spirituality. And obviously it does. And I think that's implied here in this passage. So, there's some biblical absolutes. One is draw the line at nakedness. And then, out of a sense of modesty and shamefacedness, don't even get close to that line. All right? And that's my final point that I want to make, is that we need to seek what I call the infallibly safe course. We talk about this a lot, and it's applicable in so many of the things that we are called upon to do for the Lord. Follow the infallibly safe course. Don't, as we said a minute ago, don't see how close you can come to being immodest. Don't see how close you can come to exposing nakedness. You know, I'm going to wear these shorts, and I mean they're right at the line. And if anything happens, if they ride up a half an inch, they're going to be too short. But I'm going to wear them because if I stand real straight and still and up, and don't move at all, these shorts cover enough of my leg. But if I bend over, if I move at all, they're going to ride up a little, and when they do, I'm just within a half inch of being too short already. No, that's not safe, right? Follow the infallibly safe way. Is this particular piece of apparel, is it questionable? First of all, is it questionable in your own mind? Be honest with yourself. Be honest in your own mind. This really is not too good. I have to admit, this is really pushing the envelope. If that's the case, if in your own mind, when you're being honest, you realize this is sort of a questionable piece of apparel, don't wear it. Just don't go there. And for that matter, is in the opinion of other faithful, strong, mature Christians, is this the kind of thing that I probably shouldn't be wearing? You know, and I think that might be particularly helpful to our young people and others. You know, why don't some? There's a lot of you all here who are like me. We don't ever wear shorts. Why not? Because I think it's questionable. A lot of us think it's questionable. It's not because we have some fashion sense that opposes shorts. It's not because we wouldn't even necessarily argue it might be more comfortable to wear shorts in hot weather. It's because we see that there's some doubt, some question. And especially because we see that often when people do wear those kind of clothes, they cross the line. Inadvertently, they cross the line into exposing nakedness. If it's questionable, if you have any doubt at all, don't go there. Follow the infallibly safe course. All right, that's our lesson for tonight. Again, on the basis that I was challenged to do what we typically do, and I hadn't done it yet, have a springtime or summertime lesson on modesty. I hope I've fulfilled my duty in regards to that. But thanks for listening, and I hope it's helpful. We've all got to make this, as I said earlier, we make these choices every single day, and we need to be making good choices. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. If you have any questions, I'd be glad to talk with you about it. We're going to sing a song of invitation. As we sing this song of invitation, if there are any here who need our help in making your life right with God, either in obeying the gospel, if you're not yet a Christian, or if you need the prayers of the saints, anything we can do to help in making your life right with God, let us know while we stand and sing this song. Christ.